I don't know if you've heard Super League potentially coming 2031. I mean, we just can't go like a couple months without some new idea trying to revolutionize college football. But that's what it is. Project Rudy. Have you heard anything about this at all?
Well, I read Dennis Dodd's report on CBSSports.com, and that followed the report from Yahoo Sports. Cooper, you said it, preps to pros. Yeah, we are going back to our roots because this Super League, to me, 70 teams? We're going to have private equity in here. It's feeling a lot like the NFL, Coop, and it says they're going to eliminate games against Group of Five competition and no games against G5 opponents. They're going to expand the playoff. You'd get some automatic bids in there. Feels like we're going to have the AFC, we're going to have the NFC, we'll have wild card divisions, and we'll have essentially a Super Bowl. So yes, to me, this feels like the NFL. I wrote down some things here. Are we going to get preseason games, right? Like you can't just jump into a conference schedule, 12 games. I think we're going to get some preseason action a little bit. And, like player fines. Think about it, Cooper. How's the recruiting going to work now that private equity is going to be involved a little bit? I think the entire recruiting process, and we've been hinting at this for a while now, it's going to be completely flipped upside down. There isn't going to be official visits, all right? They're going to be like those NFL 30-player team visits you have before the NFL draft. So certainly interesting. I think there's another one out there, the Super League. Yeah, you said Project Rudy, two different groups trying to get this together. I think this is where we're headed. Like that's my vision. And I think the other note here, Cooper, is it wouldn't go into effect until 2031. All these major media deals need to finish, and then something else would be born. It'd be interesting to see how they get to the 70 schools, though. Like who's in, who's out. And I haven't seen anything about like promotion relegation either.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept as well. I think what this has to do with, if obviously you haven't figured it out by now, but you talked about the media rights expiring in 2031. That's where you could revisit this type of concept. The groundwork would have to be laid upon right now. You talked about private equity. I thought this quote from somebody involved in this situation behind the scenes was pretty telling. College football is by a long margin the second most valuable sport in the United States of America. It's sort of under-marketed, under-distributed, and under-monetized. So this all comes down to dollars and cents, in case you weren't aware. But Drew, that is true, but it doesn't make me necessarily love the idea or gravitate towards that. What makes college football so great, in my opinion, is getting to see what we've been able to see over the last couple of weeks in some of the upsets. And you and I talking about Brian Vincent and Louisiana Monroe and what they've been able to do. There's so many examples of that you could go on and on. David versus Goliath, that happens every single week. Those group of five teams, there are 67 Power Four teams right now. So what happens to those group of five programs? What happens to an Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State? And I think the easy answer for a lot of people out there would say, well, he would go find another place to play, and especially one that would have the media rights deal of 70 programs. But Drew, I don't know how I feel about it. Typically, when this news kind of trickles down, it takes me some time to really kind of wrap my head around it. But it's a fascinating idea. I don't think we're really going to have a pulse on whether or not this really kind of has legs, maybe until 2 or 3 years from now.
Yeah, and to spin it towards, the 105, what we talk about, I think the personnel positions are going to be that much more important. Roster management, do we get practice squads? Is that the 85 scholarships going to the 105s? And if there is, this Super League or the Project Rudy, does the group of five football become a true farm system where an Ashton Jeanty becomes a coveted free agent, and some of those other guys that have made the move up to contender? So certainly something to keep an eye on, and I'm sure we're only going to hear more about it in the coming years.
Earlier, you hit me on Slack and you said, hey, do we want to talk about NIL leaving college football? And I was like, what is he talking about? It's not NIL. But very similar, three letters in the same letters that we're going to talk about. NLI. You said NLI. I got it wrong. And in case you haven't heard, bye-bye National Letter of Intent. That's what we're saying. Multiple reports on Wednesday that the NCAA Division I Council is moving to eliminate the National Letter of Intent, which dates back to the 1960s. I had my cousin reach out to me. He is a high level casual fan and say, what does this mean? Drew, it really doesn't mean anything. It's non news. I think back to my day when I was a director of player personnel at Washington at Oregon, there was so much trouble that came with the national letter of intent. It's really kind of an outdated document, and it had more to do with a binding contract being the financial aid agreement. I think what's happening here with the revenue share upon us next year in college football, I think the NCAA is looking for a more solid form of documentation. That's why they're getting away from the national letter of intent at the end of the day.
Coop, I'm not going to push back here, right? I don't think much has changed at all. I made some phone calls this morning, not to high level fans, but high level ranking officials at some college football playoff contenders. And I said, does this change anything? And they said, nothing. With that being said, I do want to kind of put this out there in the sphere, right? So the national letter of intent's gone, and now they're more than likely, it seems like the consensus is these prospective student athletes will sign financial aid agreements, scholarship agreements. This sets up a little bit better with the looming revenue share, right? It's going to be more of a contract for these individuals. The one concern I've heard is there needs to be some type of deadline that this paperwork is signed. Right now, there isn't a deadline, or there needs to be a signing period window, much like the NIL or NLI. I'm going to keep getting that confused there, Cooper. And really, I think it's opening up the possibility where some of these high profile recruitments, let's take a Jeremiah Smith, for example. Remember, committed to Ohio State for a year, gets to the early signing period, and there was a lot of negotiations at the 11th hour. Those negotiations, if he doesn't have to sign in a certain date in December, they could spill into January. And Cooper, you also have to think expanded college football playoff, right? The signing period right now is before the conference championship games. I think all the coaching changes, the coaching carousel, it's not going to spin until after Christmas. If you are, let's say, a Glenn Schumann, for example, at Georgia, and you get tabbed to be the next head coach at a North Carolina, I'm just using two schools here. Well, you're going to stay and ride it out to see if you're going to win a national title. I think all those coaching changes are going to be much later. And what I'm saying is a guy like Jeremiah Smith, it might come down to when he actually steps foot on a college campus. And this is what's going on in the transfer portal, right? When you see these transfer portal commitments, nothing is binding until those student athletes actually start classes. Cam Ward, Miami's quarterback, a lot of back and forth. There was some uncertainty about whether or not he would show up. And look at Miami. It put Miami in a tough spot. I mean, if they didn't have Cam Ward, are they 6-0 right now? Do they have one of the top offenses in all of college football? So something to keep an eye on. I think for 99% of these recruitments, not much changes, but for the 1%, the true difference makers, they're going to have some leverage. It's going to be like potentially that All-American Bowl years and years ago when Najee Harris, was he going to get on the plane and go to Michigan, or was he going to go to Alabama? And I know I'm rambling here, Cooper. The other thing, I think if we go to these financial aid agreements, schools are going to push even harder to get their recruits to go and participate in bowl practices. You're going to want to lock those guys in as soon as you can and prevent other schools from kind of tampering and poaching, because you'll at least have them for 1 year.
You read into this a lot more than I did. I went to my cousin. You went to some high-level sources in college football. We dealt with this. One example that we had, Ali Cajo. I don't know if you remember him. He actually signed with the University of Washington, but never enrolled. Enrolled at University of Alabama. Shout out Tosh Lupoy being able to get that one done. Now with UCLA. So those were all kind of, I guess you would say, loopholes with the NCAA. I think they're going to have to tighten those things up. We have some comments asking about the fax machines. What happens to the fax machines? Let me let you in on a little secret. The fax machines have not been operated in quite some time. We didn't use fax machines when I was at it a couple years ago. So those are dead and gone. Rest in peace.